all to our 2020 Aerospace Engineering Commencement. And I really hope this goes smoothly, given how it is. I'm Jonathan Freund. I'm the very new head of Aerospace Engineering here at Illinois. This, for example, is my first pandemic as head so far. Obviously, this is not the commencement I was expecting to welcome you to. I'm very, very sure it was not the commencement that you were expecting either. Feeling a little lost myself and looking for some guidance, I consulted the department head's manual, and volume 27 is on commencement, and I found pandemic in the index doing some research and speech advice, and it said very simply, keep it short, which I will do here. I did put on the regalia like I would have on campus with all its frills and everything. To mark your remarkable achievements with some degree of dignity. It's also a little silly, maybe a lot silly, so I hope you also find it amusing. Being a student is probably a bit of a mix between serious and silly, or serious and fun, and I hope you had some fun along the way too. Despite what you see in the background here, you know I am not actually on campus. It was a very, very sad day for the staff and faculty to not be here with you. Or there with you, I should say. We hope you have fared as well as possible through all this. Thank you for understanding and doing your best to cope with the circumstances. We put in a big effort here, but it surely fell short of the final experience we hope to provide. So I'm not on campus, as I said, so you would assume I would be home, where I've been nearly every hour of every day for 2 months. I'm not. The internet is too sketchy where I live to trust for an event like this. And so for the third time since lockdown, I left, and I'm in a place many of you grads might actually be quite familiar with. I'm in my parents' basement using their internet. My parents seem mostly glad that I'm around, but maybe not entirely comfortable with all the youthful energy I bring. I'll head home later, where my own rising sophomore has been, also way more than he was expecting with all his youthful energy. Keep it short. So I'll say a bit more later, but for now, I'm very glad to truly welcome you to the event and to pass you on to one of our most distinguished alums, who is way, way more than 6 feet away. Introducing Jim Mocarski. Jim worked 27 years at Northrop Grumman, doing lots of works in airborne tactical sensors. He got his BS in aeronautical engineering with us here at Illinois in '89. He later got a master's degree from USC and a Harvard Business School degree. And he's continued close associations with Harvard, University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and especially, and we're very thrilled about this, of course, still in touch with Aero at Illinois. And without further ado, I'm passing you on to Jim.
Take a moment. You can close your eyes if you want. And I want you to visualize the best moment of your career you can imagine. Think forward. What have you accomplished? How do you feel? Okay, now that you have that, set that aside for a moment, and we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. Professor Freund asked me to talk a little bit about what you can expect early in your career. And that's a tough question, because each of you is going into a different role at a different organization, and expect can have many different meanings. What can I look forward to is one. But on an occasion like this, I like, what can I imagine? So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share a couple of stories from early in my career and share with you my best moment. And I hope that I'll tell you a little bit about what you can look forward to, and hopefully expand a little bit about what you can imagine. Well, when I was in your shoes way back in 1989, I was ambitious and I was confident. I was excited about my future, and certainly even more excited about the industry I was joining. And to make things even better, the fact that Northrop Grumman couldn't tell me what I was actually working on, other than I was going to have a job in flight simulation, just added to the mystery. So back then, I was a big fan of someone whose name Zig Ziglar. Now, Zig is an author and a motivational speaker. It's a little bit like Bill George. You might recognize that name, who wrote Authentic Leadership, or maybe you've heard of someone like Angela Duckworth, who just recently published her book called Grit. Well, Zig was famous for his mantra, which was, you got to have goals. And they had to be specific. What did you want? Why did you want it? And when were you going to accomplish it? So for me, I was ambitious and confident. So my what was a C-suite office. My why was, I want $1 million in the bank. After all, this was the late 80s, early 90s, and at that point, greed was good. So when was I going to accomplish it? Of course, by my 30th birthday. Why would I wait? Zig also said I better write them down, so I did. I moved to California directly from Champaign, and I got busy. Well, it turns out my first job was actually on the B-2 bomber, right at the time when we were getting ready for first flight. A thrilling and exciting time for the program, to say the least. And I'll tell you, even after a backseat ride on an F-16, which was also part of my career, the B-2 is still far and away my favorite airplane. So when I think about it, I suspect that your experiences are going to be very similar to mine and the hundreds of other new hires I've been fortunate to work with over the years. You're going to be welcomed with excitement and anticipation of your contributions to the team. You're going to be viewed generally as smarter than the cohorts before you, and you're certainly going to be greeted with a healthy dose of skepticism about your ability to apply it. You're going to make lifelong friends with others who start your careers with you. I still keep in touch, as a matter of fact, with Pat Griffin and Rich Warren, who were my best friends in those early years. And in fact, again, my kids even stay in touch with their kids. You're going to get many different assignments. Some just stuff that needs to get done, and others are really going to challenge you. And if you're doing well, it most definitely will be more than anyone should be reasonably expected to handle. But they all have one purpose. Your teammates are trying to figure out what you can be trusted with. So the one thing I did consistently that helped me build that trust was asking why. And I did that a lot, probably like a third grader in some people's opinions. Why was this important to the project? Why is it important to the business, to the customer, to the person asking me to do it? This helped me understand why it should be important to me and made sure that I was solving the right problems. It gave me a way to challenge assumptions and sort through them and ultimately decide what to do and what not to do. It helped me figure out what I valued, what motivated me. This reminds me of a great story that Zig Ziglar used to tell about his Christmas time. And it turns out that his mother used to cut the end off the ham before she put it in the oven, and this perplexed him. So he asked his mom, why do you cut the end off the ham? And she says, son, I don't know, but my mother, your grandmother, always did it. So let's ask her. So they went and found Grandma and asked Grandma, why did you cut the end off the ham? And she said, grandson, I don't know, but my mother, your great-grandmother used to cut the hand off it. That's why I did it. And so they went and talked to great-grandmother. And they said, why do you cut the end off the ham? We really need to know. And she looked him in the eye, shook her head a little bit and said, Zig, the oven was only this big. So that's a funny story about asking why, but it does highlight one of my philosophies and a little advice I'll give. A great rule to live by is just don't do dumb stuff. And of course, there's a corollary that's do smart stuff. For the record, not doing dumb stuff will be way more important to your career than doing smart stuff. And believe me, you're going to be asked to do a lot of dumb stuff, especially if you're going to go work for a big company like I did. And you're going to be forced to figure out the smart stuff for yourself. But the good news is you guys are in a unique position to do this better than any of us who have been around for decades, because we know why the dumb stuff is so important, because we, after all, put it there. This is a responsibility that you're going to have, and I think this is where you can really make a big difference. As a matter of fact, when I was running the business unit, Airborne Tactical Sensors, my team and I added "Don't do dumb stuff" to our value statement, which caught some attention in the aerospace world. But the good news is when you do this well, the dumb stuff actually does leave the processes and it leaves the culture, and the smart stuff does take over. And more importantly to you personally will be that this is how you're going to earn the trust of your organization. So early on, in my career, asking why and not doing dumb stuff was serving me well. I was building a reputation as someone who got stuff done and was being trusted with more and more responsibility. After a little less than 2 years, I was already responsible for scheduling the flight simulator for the B-2 program, and I was also in charge of making sure that all the material we needed for the laboratory was procured and delivered on time. We're running 2 shifts at the time to get through flight test and a low rate initial production decision. Huge pressure on the organization because our lab was on the critical path for the avionics team, for the flight controls team, as well as pilot training heading into first flight. Well, I was working with some of my colleagues over in procurement, and I realized that generally speaking, they had no idea what they were buying, let alone why they were buying it. It was just a bunch of specs and some part numbers. And I had an idea. What if we bring all of these procurement folks through the lab and let them at least see, let at least some of them fly it so they can see why what they're doing every day mattered. Well, you can imagine with how that went over with all the engineers and managers of the organization, because I was recommending that we allocate somewhere a week to a week and a half of premium first shift time to buyers. That's dumb stuff. But I was convinced it was the right thing to do, and I fought hard for it, and I even got called to the head of all of B2 Labs, Doug Wood's office, to explain myself. But in the end, my arguments won the day on the people side, and by showing that changing the shifts, while inconvenient, did allow us to still hold our schedule. So we did it, and the result, we had an engaged procurement team, a fun week for the lab, and from then on, as you can imagine, our parts were always at the top of the pile when it came to processing for those procurements. In fact, I was at a leadership conference about 10 or 12 years later, and someone I didn't remember came up, introduced themselves, and asked if I was the same Jim that had arranged for those tours of the flight simulation laboratory, telling me how much fun they had and how great a memory it was. Well, I'll tell you, having someone tell you that you created a great moment in their careers is really special. So remember, I had goals, right? C-suite, $1 million. My career moved on. I got a fellowship from Northrop to get my master's degree. I moved over into research and development and worked in projects and strategic planning. Got more new and larger responsibilities and had the privilege of working with the corporate strategy group. C-suite, here I come. And then it happened, my 30th birthday. So I was sitting in my cube and realized I was not in the C-suite. And I knew there was no $1 million in my bank account. So I left that day, a little bit dejected. But looking back now, I realize how lucky I really was. I had a great family, great friends, and I absolutely loved what I was doing. I was happy. Sure, I missed my date, but I wasn't out of the game. I think today's consultants would probably call that resilience, since we've got to have a new buzzword every few years. I remember that moment in my career as special, not because I learned to handle failure, but rather much later in my career, a really good friend of mine, Jim Carlson, counseled me that interesting work with cool people to hang out with is what really matters. So I ask you to keep that in mind as you move through your career. Well, my next role was a program manager in a brand new business called Infrared Countermeasures. And I was going to be managing parts of the product development organization. This was going to take my family and I back to Chicago. And that meant saying goodbye to all of my friends and family I've made over the past 8 years. My good friend, boss at the time, and mentor, he was by the name of Jim Reese. And at my going away lunch, Jim gave me a book. It's called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. You may have heard of it. Very appropriate for my type A personality, and I still have it. But I didn't keep it because it's such a great book. It is. But I kept it because of the message Jim wrote to me inside. It was full of encouragement. But even though he gave me the opportunity to learn and to lead, and with all he taught me and all he mentored me, in that note, he thanked me for what I taught him. Now, I'm sure the Career Center at University of Illinois has told you how important a mentor is. And they are. And you're going to have many of them throughout your career. But I want you to remember that mentoring is a two-way street. I've been a formal and informal mentor and a formal and informal mentee. And one thing I know for sure is when it's done right, you can't tell the difference. So getting that note from Jim was another great moment in my career. Well, I mentioned infrared countermeasures, and what that is, it's a self-protection system for airplanes that detects a missile launch. It tracks that missile, puts a laser energy on that seeker, takes over the guidance system, and steers it off course, all while that missile's flying at you at Mach 2. I had led the development of the missile warner system itself, the electro-optical transmitters, and the laser through a couple of generations. That was my role. Another important part of the organization was business development. And a gentleman by the name of Jack Pledger told us a story when he came back from a conference. And the story was that a young officer from the Air Force came into the conference and started to raise a bit of a ruckus and was making some noise. Where's the Northrop booth? Where's the Northrop Grumman booth? I need to find those guys. Pretending to be mad, it turns out. So he eventually found the booth, walked up to the table and said, I want to talk to somebody from infrared countermeasures. Is there somebody here? And my friend Jack, a little bit intimidated, a little bit apprehensive, stepped up, introduced himself. And then it got quiet in his story. And that young officer held out his hand, looked Jack in the eye and said, thank you. I'm here today because your shit worked. What's really interesting about that story is I didn't know what a great moment it was at the time I first heard it. It was just another funny anecdote coming out of business development. And it wasn't until I was at business school when we had an assignment to go back through our entire life as best we could remember. Write down all of those important moments that changed your direction, put you on a new path professionally or personally. And when through that exercise, that's when I realized that this was, in fact, the best moment of my career. And I wasn't even there for it. It's where I made a real difference. This unnamed officer got to go home to his family. And I realized throughout that exercise that every moment that was important to me that I wrote down had one thing in common. There was people involved. Someone was part of my story and I was part of theirs. You may have noticed that I've used the names of those people as I talked about them. You wouldn't know any of them. No reason to. My wife, Chris, my great friends, Pat Griffin and Rich Warren, Doug Wood, Jim Reese, Jim Carlson, that unnamed officer who represents every soldier who got to return to his family because my stuff worked. And there's many others I didn't mention, like Joe Magnelli and Mark Hurt, who became my closest friends when we moved back to Chicago. Jim Cameron, Dave Jones, Bob Del Boca, Gloria Flock, all executives, bosses, and mentors who you wouldn't know, but each made a difference to me. And I hope that I made a difference to them. So it was that realization that I stopped worrying about that $1 million in the C-suite office. Sure, they were the what and the why I wrote down so many years ago, and it kept me going and was important. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Instead, I decided to try to be part of as many people's stories as I could. And it was this decision that let my career take off and made the rewards become so much more meaningful. So you guys are starting your careers at one of the most exciting times in aerospace history. It's a time of renewal. B-2s are becoming B-21s. F-16s are F-35s. Space shuttle missions to the International Space Station is now becoming, we're thinking about going back to Mars. CubeSats, commercial launches, startups building supersonic transports again, hypersonics. Your career is, by definition, going to be filled with wonderful and exciting technical firsts. You're going to be rewarded with promotions and raises. But it's my hope that you will also feel the accomplishments of seeing a mentor or a mentee get promoted, of making lifelong friends united by a mission, and staying involved with the University of Illinois and being inspired by that wicked smart next generation. You know, I've led teams that built businesses, turned around businesses, grown businesses, and I can tell you that these other things are so much more rewarding than meeting project schedules or making a profit. So I want you to think back over the last 4 years. Are your best moments tests and report cards? Do you remember being handed that AIAA trophy, or do you remember the feelings you shared with your teammates? Do you remember turning in your senior design project, or some goofball moment that can only happen during an all-nighter? You're part of so many stories at this great department, this great university, and I want you guys to know that you being here really mattered. And I only wish I didn't wait 25 years to come back and really engage and involve. So I really encourage you to stay involved with the university. You know, Zig taught me you got to have goals. But back in 1989, when I was in your shoes, I missed the other half of the message. He also said you can get anything you want out of life as long as you help enough other people get what they want. So I started by asking you to envision your best career moment. And I'll close by asking you to do that again, hopefully with a little different perspective. So thank you for letting me be a very small part of your story. And thank you for becoming part of mine. And I know you're going to make yourselves, your parents, and this great university proud. So, Askiwawo, everybody.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for your continued involvement in the department and the university. It's so valuable to have your experience coming back to us. Up next, I believe we have a short video that the faculty, staff, and students of the university prepared to show you.
Hail to the orange, hail to the blue. Hail alma mater. Ever so true, so true. We love no other, so let our motto be.
Hi, I'm Stan Deal, President and CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, and proud alumni of Class of 1986. For all of you graduating, congratulations, ILL.
So obviously a lot of people are very proud of your accomplishments here at Illinois and wanted to pass on their congratulations in that video and otherwise. As you know, aerospace engineers have been behind some of the greatest feats of humanity, really. Flight itself, which is claimed impossible probably more times than countable through written history and probably before written history. Small things like the moon landing or vehicles that move so fast that the air around them can not just melt them, but actually burn them if not designed properly. Vehicles so safe despite their zillions of parts that you put yourself and loved ones on them and without really giving it much thought. These extreme challenges underlie in aerospace engineering and they elevate us all. For those of you who are hoping to join the aerospace industry, we've tried to provide you a springboard education into that. We've covered many specific analyses and methods, but it's more likely actually the ways of thinking, the teamwork and underlying principles you've mastered and your burgeoning clarity of thought that you'll leverage in the future as you leave us. These are portable wherever you go, aerospace or otherwise. It is a great education. Of course, what do you actually have? What is an education? Education is abstract, but it does foster prosperity, however you define that prosperity. Education is what you have left after you've forgotten all that you've learned. It's something I like to say. You might be on your way with that, the forgetting part, but it is the value we try to deliver. Now that you're done, stay in touch. Please stay in touch. We want to know how it goes for you and what you do next and how we can make it better for those who will follow. What you will see looking back will be an increasingly close-knit community, an increasingly diverse community, and an increasingly inclusive community at Illinois. For example, it was the first woman to graduate here with a PhD was only in 1977. And if you see that we're 75 years old now, you might say that that was at least 30 years later than it should have been. I myself can only imagine that it was somewhat harder being such a pioneer. That was maybe 35 too late, 35 years too late. We've come far in this regard. We are no way done, and we will do better still. We will strive such that no one feels the weight of pioneering at the same time as the weight of learning. We will strive so that everyone is a pioneer by choice in their own way, facing only the challenges of awesome, extreme aerospace engineering. On this and really all things, we are so eager for your feedback after you leave, especially now without the constraints of grades and degrees to occupy your thinking. We're still more eager for your feedback in the future, once the wisdom earned of hindsight comes to you. Congratulations to our BS, MS, MEng grads. Congratulations to our PhD grads. Our switch to online education over spring break went much smoother than it would have otherwise, thanks to our continuous practice teaching our online MS, MEng students. For them, I think this all seemed pretty normal, I assume, and congrats to you too if there are any have logged in. We'll be looking towards more opportunities like this. We're putting together a significant scholarship effort right now to facilitate online master's studies, and you may very well be getting an email about this in the next days. I would say more about that, but the head's instruction manual says do not mention more studying at commencement, and so that's enough for any opportunities for more studying. You can think about that tomorrow. So to finish, you made it. You were an elite group. Even if you feel like you barely made it, you were still part of an elite group, and time will confirm that, whatever you do next. You are some of the best people that I know. I know you will not suffer from elitism, even though you are elite. You will remain on our minds. Sorry it wasn't the commencement we expected or hoped for. Thanks for doing your best. Thanks for understanding as we try to do our best. Keep in touch. Laura especially wants to hear from you, and many other faculty and staff do too. Be safe. Continue to learn. Teach others. Change the world, as I know you can, and a final thank you.